My name is Renee Ashby. I'm 31. For 6 years, I paid my best friend's rent every single month, on time, without her ever once having to ask twice. Last Saturday, at her engagement party, her fiancé's mother asked who I was. Priya didn't miss a beat. "Oh, just someone from work," she said, and turned back to the cake table before I'd even fully processed the sentence. I stood there holding a glass of Prosecco I didn't want, in a dress I'd bought specifically for that party, and felt 6 years fold up into 4 words. Welcome back. If you've ever found out in one careless sentence exactly how someone actually sees you, stay with me, because what I did the following Monday morning is the reason Priya's rent has been late for the first time in 6 years. I need to take you back to a Tuesday in October, 6 years ago, because you won't understand why that sentence hit the way it did unless you understand everything I built underneath it first. I met Priya Malhotra during our first week at the same marketing firm in Minneapolis, both of us 25, both of us terrified, assigned to share a cubicle wall because the office ran out of real ones. She brought me coffee my second morning without being asked, because she'd noticed I looked like I hadn't slept. I brought her a granola bar my third morning, because I'd noticed she skipped lunch to finish a deck nobody else on the team would have bothered rushing for. We became the kind of friends who finish each other's meeting sentences. Weekend brunches, late-night phone calls about nothing, the kind of closeness I'd never quite managed with anyone else, not even people I'd known since childhood. I want to give you a real sense of what those early years actually looked like, because it matters later. Priya was the one who drove 2 hours to my hometown for my grandmother's funeral, sitting quietly in the back pew of a church she'd never been to, in a town she'd never visited, just so I wouldn't have to look up and see an empty seat where a friend should have been. I was the one who spent a whole weekend helping her repaint her first apartment after a bad breakup, the two of us eating cold pizza on drop cloths at midnight, laughing about nothing important. We built something over those first 18 months that felt, to me, like the kind of friendship people write books about. I still believe, even now, that it was real. That's part of what makes all of this so hard to hold. 18 months in, Priya's world came apart fast. Her father's small import business collapsed under a supplier fraud case that made the local news for about a week and then vanished, the way these things do, leaving nothing behind but debt. Priya's parents lost their house. Priya, meanwhile, was 3 months behind on her own rent, quietly drowning, telling nobody at the office because appearances mattered to her more than almost anything else I'd ever seen in a person. She told me on a Thursday night, crying in my kitchen, that her landlord had given her until the end of the month or an eviction filing would start. I didn't think twice. I want to be honest about that because it matters for everything that came after. I didn't offer out of some calculated plan. I offered because she was my best friend, and best friends don't watch each other get evicted while they still have room on a credit card. "Let me cover this month," I said. "We'll figure out the rest." "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking, I'm offering." That first month became 6 years. I want you to sit with that math the way I've had to sit with it since Saturday. 6 years, 12 months a year, roughly $1,400 a month once her rent crept up with 2 lease renewals. I never once made her sign anything. I never once tracked it in a spreadsheet the way part of me now wishes I had. I just set up an automatic transfer on the first of every month and let it become as ordinary as breathing. If you've ever loved someone so completely that helping them stopped feeling like a decision and started feeling like a reflex, comment, not asking, offering below, because I promise you, that reflex can carry you a lot further than it should before you notice what it's actually costing. Priya's circumstances improved within a couple of years. She got promoted. Her parents recovered enough to move into a small condo of their own. By any reasonable measure, she could have taken over her own rent again by year 3, maybe even year 2 if she'd tightened her budget the way I quietly tightened mine to keep the transfers going. I remember the exact night I first noticed the gap between what she could afford and what I was still covering. She'd posted a photo from a work conference in Chicago, a nice hotel, a rooftop bar, a new bag I didn't recognize slung over her shoulder in the background of someone else's picture. I didn't say anything. I told myself travel was different that a work trip got expensed, that the bag was probably a gift. I built a dozen small explanations that year for a dozen small things, because examining any one of them too closely would have meant admitting something I wasn't ready to admit yet. She never brought it up. Neither did I, not really, not directly. I told myself that's what real friendship looked like, generosity without a ledger, love without a due date. I told myself a lot of things, looking back, that were more about protecting my own comfort with the arrangement than they were about anything actually true. Here's what I didn't examine closely enough, for 6 straight years. Every single time the subject came anywhere near money, Priya changed the direction of the conversation with the same practiced ease she used on difficult clients at work. A joke. A change of subject. Once, memorably, she simply got up to refill her wine and never came back to the table. I let her, every time, because pressing the question felt like accusing my best friend of something, and I would rather have kept paying quietly forever than risk finding out what the accusation might actually reveal. Priya met Connor 2.5 years ago at a mutual friend's barbecue, and I watched the whole relationship unfold from a front row seat, the way you do when you're someone's closest confidant. I met him for the first time about 6 weeks in, at a dinner Priya organized specifically so her 2 favorite people could finally be in the same room. Connor was easy to like. Warm, a little goofy, the kind of guy who remembers small details you mentioned once in passing and brings them up months later like they mattered to him the whole time. He asked me real questions that night, about my job, about a half marathon I'd mentioned training for, and I left that dinner thinking Priya had found someone genuinely good. At the end of that first dinner, walking us both out to our cars, Connor said something that stuck with me for reasons I couldn't fully name at the time. "Priya talks about you constantly," he told me. "I feel like I already know you." I remember feeling warmed by that, proud even, the way you feel when someone confirms that the friendship you've built actually shows up in the way your friend describes their life to the people who matter to them. I didn't know yet how much that sentence would end up mattering, or how differently it would read months later. What I didn't fully register, not for a long while, was how Priya introduced me to him that first night. "This is Renee," she'd said, "my person." Her person. I held on to that phrase for 2.5 years without once questioning whether it was still true, the same way you hold onto a photograph without checking if the person in it still looks like that. Connor proposed on a rooftop in downtown Minneapolis. This past spring, string lights, and a violinist Priya had apparently dreamed about since college, the whole thing photographed by a professional Connor had hired without telling her. She called me before she called her own mother. I remember exactly where I was standing in my kitchen when my phone rang, and I remember screaming loud enough that my downstairs neighbor texted to ask if I was okay. I helped her choose her engagement party dress. I sat with her for 3 hours picking out a venue. I was, by every measure I could see from the inside, still exactly who I'd always been to her. The engagement party happened last Saturday, at a rented event space downtown, 60 guests, a dessert table Priya had planned for weeks. I arrived early to help with last-minute setup, the way I always did for anything that mattered to her, arranging centerpieces and tapping up a photo collage of the 2 of them that Priya had specifically asked me to help design. Connor's mother, Diane, a polished woman in her 60s with the kind of warmth that seems genuine right up until you're the one it's aimed at with a question you weren't ready for, found me near the gift table about an hour into the party. I'd noticed her earlier, moving through the room the way certain mothers do at these events, cataloging every guest, matching faces to whatever mental list she'd apparently built of people who mattered to her son's new fiancé. She'd been perfectly pleasant to me the 2 other times our paths had crossed that hour, complimenting the centerpieces I'd helped arrange, asking if I'd tried the mini quiches. I had no reason to expect the question that came next to land the way it did. "And how do you 2 know each other?" she asked, gesturing between me and the general direction of Priya, who was a few feet away, laughing with a cluster of Connor's cousins. I opened my mouth to answer myself. Priya got there first, catching the tail end of the question as she turned back toward us. "Oh, just someone from work," she said, breezy, already reaching for a cake sample off a passing tray. We used to sit near each other. 6 years. I stood there holding a glass of Prosecco I hadn't touched, doing the math the way you do when a number suddenly refuses to add up the way it always had before. Just someone from work. We used to sit near each other. Past tense, on both counts, delivered without a single flicker of hesitation, like she'd rehearsed a version of our friendship that fit more comfortably into a room full of Connor's family than the real one ever could. I smiled. I want you to know I actually managed to smile and say something forgettable back to Diane about the venue's lighting and get through the rest of that party on autopilot, the specific autopilot you learn to run on when your body needs to keep functioning in public before your mind has caught up with what just happened. I drove home that night and sat in my car in my own driveway for almost 20 minutes before I trusted myself to go inside. I ran through the party again and again in my head, looking for a version where I'd misheard her, where someone from work had actually been someone I've worked with for years who happens to be my closest friend. Some longer sentence I'd simply caught the tail end of. I couldn't find that version anywhere in my memory. I'd heard it exactly the way it was said, quick and breezy and final, the sentence of someone who'd already decided, long before that party, how small a box I fit into. Here's the thing about being someone's just someone from work after 6 years of quietly keeping a roof over their head. It doesn't just sting. It recalibrates every single memory you'd filed under friendship into a different category entirely, one you didn't know existed until you needed it. I sat in that car running back through years of brunches, late-night calls, 3-hour dress shopping trips, and one very specific automatic transfer that had left my account on the 1st of every month for 6 years running. And I understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, that I had spent 6 years being generous with someone who had apparently decided, at some point I couldn't pinpoint, that I was no longer worth explaining to the people who mattered to her. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect crying at this part of the story, and I owe you the truth instead. What I felt was quieter and colder than crying. I felt the specific, clarifying stillness of a person finally putting down something they didn't realize had gotten too heavy to keep carrying. I opened my banking app that same night, sitting in my driveway, and looked at the automatic transfer I'd set up 6 years earlier and never once revisited. $1,400, scheduled to leave my account again in 9 days, on the 1st of the month, the way it had left without fail for 72 consecutive months. I scrolled back through the transaction history without meaning to, watching 6 years of my own generosity laid out in a column of identical line items. Month after month after month, the most consistent relationship I'd apparently had with anyone in my adult life, turning out to be with a recurring payment instead of a person. I didn't cancel it that night. I want you to understand why, because it matters for what happened next. I wasn't ready yet to make a decision out of anger. I wanted to make it out of clarity instead, and clarity, I've learned, usually needs a little more time to arrive properly than anger does. So I sat with it. For 3 days, I sat with a silence that felt, for the first time in 6 years, entirely my own to fill. I went to work Monday morning and functioned normally, answered emails, sat through a meeting I couldn't have summarized 10 minutes after it ended. Nobody in that office knew anything had shifted. That's the strange thing about the exact moment a friendship quietly ends. It doesn't announce itself to anyone but the 2 people standing inside it, and even then, usually, only to one of them at first. On the 4th morning after the party, I opened my banking app and canceled the automatic transfer. It took 11 seconds. 6 years, undone in 11 seconds, and the strangest part was how little it actually felt like anything at all. No lightning bolt. No dramatic music, just a small confirmation screen that said the recurring payment had been successfully removed. Then I texted Priya, "Can we talk today? In person, not over the phone." She wrote back within minutes, "Of course, lunch." An exclamation point, like nothing at all had happened 4 days earlier. I think that exclamation point bothered me more than almost anything else that week, the sheer weightlessness of it. The proof that whatever had cracked open in me at that party hadn't cracked anything open in her at all. Welcome back. If you've ever had to sit across from someone you loved and finally say the sentence you'd swallowed for years, "Stay with me," because what Priya said back to me at that lunch is the reason I haven't spoken to her since. We met at a small cafe near our old office, a place we'd been to dozens of times over the years, always the same corner table if it was free. It was free that day too, which felt, in a small, useless way, like the universe setting the scene exactly wrong. Priya was already there when I arrived, scrolling her phone, and she looked up with the easy warmth she always greeted me with, like absolutely nothing between us had shifted. "You seem serious," she said once we'd ordered. "Everything okay?" "I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer it," I said. "At the party, when Diane asked how we know each other, you said I was just someone from work." Priya's face did something complicated. A flicker of recognition followed almost immediately by a kind of practiced smoothness settling back over it. "Renee, it was one sentence at a party. I was juggling 60 guests and Connor's entire extended family. It didn't mean anything." "It's not just the sentence," I said. "It's 6 years of rent, Priya." The table went quiet in the specific way that tells you the other person has heard exactly what you said and is deciding, in real time, how to handle it. "That's not fair," she said finally. "You're bringing up money because of one offhand comment at a party." "It's not one comment," I said. "It's the comment that finally let me see the pattern I'd been ignoring for 6 years. Every time your mom mentioned me at a family dinner, every time you introduced me to someone new, I never once asked what version of me you were handing them. I just assumed it matched what I thought we were. I don't think it did. Not for a long time." "I'm bringing up money," I said, "because apparently the only version of our friendship you were comfortable explaining to your future mother-in-law was one where I don't exist as anything more than a former cubicle neighbor. And I've spent 6 years making sure you had somewhere to live." "I was going to pay you back," she said. "You know that. I always said I would once things settled down." I want to tell you I'd never once heard her say that sentence before. I hadn't. Not once in 6 years had Priya ever actually said the words "I'll pay you back" out loud to me. She said it for the first time at that cafe table, 4 days after calling me a stranger to a room full of people who mattered to her, and something about the timing made it land less like a promise and more like an excuse manufactured on the spot. "You've never said that to me before," I told her. "Not once." She didn't have an answer for that. She reached for her water glass instead, the same reflex she'd used for 6 years every single time money came anywhere near a conversation between us. If you've ever finally said the true thing out loud only to watch the other person reach for a distraction instead of an answer, comment, "the water glass," below, because I promise you, that reflex tells you everything you need to know before a single other word gets said. "I canceled the transfer," I said. "This morning. Your rent's due in 9 days and it's not coming from my account anymore." Priya's face changed for real this time, all the practiced smoothness gone at once. "You can't just do that without warning me." "I gave you 6 years of warning," I said. "Every single first of the month was a warning I never made you actually hear, because I kept doing it anyway. This is the first time in 6 years I've said no to something, and you're upset about the notice period." "Renee, I have a wedding to plan. I don't have an extra $1,400 just sitting around right now." "Neither did I," I said. "For 6 years. I found it anyway every single month because you were my best friend and I thought that's what best friends did. I'd like to know when you decided I'd stopped being that, or if I was ever actually that to you at all." She started crying then, the way people cry when they've been caught rather than when they're actually sorry, and some old reflex in me almost reached across the table to comfort her the way I had 100 times before. "I didn't. I want you to know that took more effort than almost anything else I did that week." "I never meant to hurt you," she said. "You have to know that." "I believe you didn't mean to," I said. "I don't think that's the same as not doing it. I think you got comfortable enough with what I gave you that you stopped seeing it as something I was actually giving. It just became background. Something that happened automatically, the same way I set it up to happen automatically, and I think somewhere in there I became background too." I left that lunch without finishing my coffee. Priya called 4 more times that afternoon. I let every one of them go to voicemail. Connor found out 2 days later, and not from me. I want to be clear about that, because I know some of you are picturing me marching straight to him with receipts. That's not what happened. Priya told him herself, apparently, in some version of the story I'll never fully know the shape of, and whatever she said was enough that he called me directly that same evening. I almost didn't pick up. I'd spent 2 days finally getting a little distance from the whole situation, and part of me worried a call from Connor would just drag me back into somebody else's mess to manage. I answered anyway, mostly because 6 years of instinct doesn't disappear in 48 hours, and some old habit in me still wanted to make sure everyone else was okay before I let myself fully rest. "Renee," he said when I picked up, "I need to ask you something, and I need the truth, not whatever's easiest to say." "Okay." "Priya told me you'd been helping with her rent. She made it sound like it was a few months, a couple years ago, back when her dad's business fell apart." He paused. "How long was it actually?" I sat with that question for a second, because I understood, hearing it, exactly what kind of conversation Priya had chosen to have with her own fiancé about 6 years of my life. 6 years, I said. Every single month on time since about a year and a half after we met. It only just stopped 4 days ago. The silence on the other end of the line went on long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. 6 years, Connor finally repeated, quiet. She told me it was maybe 8 or 9 months, a long time ago. She made it sound like ancient history. "It's not ancient history," I said. "The transfer left my account on the 1st of every single month until this Tuesday." I heard him exhale slowly. "I introduced you to my mother as her college friend, because that's what Priya told me you were before I even met you. I've been engaged to this woman for 6 months, Renee, and I apparently don't know the first real thing about how she talks about the people who matter to her." I didn't say anything to that. It wasn't my job to talk him through what he was realizing about his own fiancé, and some part of me understood that whatever came next between them belonged entirely to the two of them, not to me. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "For whatever that's worth right now, I'm going to talk to her." I don't know exactly what that conversation looked like, because I wasn't there for it and Priya has never once told me. But I know the wedding got postponed within the month, quietly, no public announcement, just a change in the group chat status of mutual friends who noticed the venue deposit had apparently been pulled. I know because a coworker mentioned it to me weeks later, without realizing what she was actually telling me, that Connor had asked Priya directly why she'd never once mentioned 6 years of rent to the woman who'd asked how we knew each other. Priya's rent came due 9 days after our lunch, for the first time in 6 years without my money behind it. I know it went in late because a mutual friend mentioned, again without realizing the weight of what she was saying, that Priya had scrambled to cover it herself and barely made the grace period. I felt something when I heard that. I want to be honest about what it was, because I think people expect satisfaction at this part of the story, some clean feeling of justice finally landing. What I actually felt was closer to grief than victory. Grief for 6 years I couldn't get back. Grief for a friendship I genuinely believed in, all the way up until the exact second it turned out to have been something smaller than I thought, at least from her side of the table. Priya texted me twice more over the following month. The first message was another apology, longer this time, more carefully worded, the kind of message you can tell went through several drafts before it got sent. The second, 3 weeks later, asked if I might be willing to help with a smaller amount just until the wedding rescheduled, just until things settled again. I didn't answer either one. I want you to understand that wasn't cruelty. It was the first time in 6 years I'd actually let myself choose what I owed someone, instead of assuming the answer was always everything, immediately, without question. Here's what I've learned in the 2 months since that engagement party, sitting with all of this longer than I initially wanted to. Generosity without a boundary doesn't actually protect a friendship. It just delays the moment you find out what the friendship was actually built on. I spent 6 years believing that helping Priya without ever asking for anything back was proof of how much I loved her. What it actually did was make it easy for her to file me under a category that cost her nothing to explain, because I'd never once made her explain it to me either. I still think about that phrase sometimes. Just someone from work. 4 words delivered without a flicker of hesitation, and I've come to understand they weren't actually cruel on purpose. That's almost the harder part to sit with. Priya didn't say it to hurt me. She said it because, somewhere over 6 years of my quiet consistency, that's genuinely what I'd become to her, a background fact so ordinary she didn't think to describe it any other way. I've started seeing a financial therapist, which is a real profession, apparently, and something I didn't know existed until I needed it. She asked me, in our first session, why I thought I'd never once asked Priya for the money back, not even once, across 6 full years. I didn't have a clean answer for her. I think, somewhere underneath the generosity, I was scared that asking would prove something I wasn't ready to know yet, that the friendship might not survive an honest accounting of what it actually was. It didn't survive the accounting. I know that now. I think, in some strange way, that's its own kind of answer. Connor reached out one more time, a few weeks after everything settled, not to relay a message from Priya, just on his own. He told me the wedding was back on, smaller now, a different venue, and that he'd insisted on one thing before he'd agree to move forward with it at all. Priya had opened a real savings account, in her own name, and started paying me back in monthly installments whether I wanted the money or not, because he wasn't going to marry someone who thought 6 years of someone else's rent was a footnote. I told him that wasn't his fight to have on my behalf. He said he understood that, and that he was having it anyway, because apparently watching someone you love shrink another person down to nothing changes how you see the whole relationship, whether that person asked you to notice or not. The payments started arriving the following month, small, consistent, landing on the 1st, the same date that used to carry money in the opposite direction for 6 straight years. I don't know yet if I'll ever call Priya my best friend again. I don't know if that particular door is one I even want open anymore. What I do know is this. I finally understand the difference between being loved and being useful, and I'm not going to spend the next 6 years confusing the two again for anyone, no matter how much I love them. That's my story. 6 years of rent, 4 words at an engagement party, one 11-second cancellation that finally told the truth my silence never could. If you've ever found out, in one careless sentence, that you were never actually as essential to someone as you'd let yourself believe, go look at what you've been quietly carrying for them. You might be the only one who ever bothered to add it up. If this reached you, send it to someone who needs permission to finally say no. Drop a comment. Hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.